Welcome, welcome, welcome to the village. Welcome to the village. You know what time it is. It's time for us to sit back, chat, and talk about what? My favorite topic, leadership. So, this is part two of our conversation about leading during difficult times. All right. We're going to talk about leading during difficult times. And I have a leadership expert with us today. My special guest today is Dr. Tommy Nash. Dr. Nash is a leadership expert. He's not new to the game. He is an author, entrepreneur, and he's going to pour into the village today. So welcome, 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 Dr. Nash, to the village.
Well,
Welcome.
thank you, Dr. Gaskins, and all of the Village Leadership Group for having me this evening. It's an
Thank you for joining.
absolute opportunity and privilege.
Yes, yes, yes. And thank you for coming and being open to share with the village. We appreciate you. Listen, guys, on Tuesday, we started our conversation about leading during difficult times, and we had Dr. Porter come and tell us a little bit about how school leaders and educators and teachers are transitioning their leadership for these type of times. So again, join the conversation. I am Dr. Rosalind Gaskins, CEO and founder of the Village Leadership Group, LLC. And again, welcome to the village. Now, I know what you're thinking. Well, why is Dr. Nash here? You know, he's not an educator. That's all right. He's been in the game for about leadership for over 20 years, starting off as a naval officer, going into private practice, the federal government. So he is even an author of a leadership book. So he is one of the top leadership developers and instructors. So again, we're going to hear some tips and advice from Dr. Nash. But Dr. Nash, I want to know a little bit about the type of advice you will have for us when we're dealing with difficult times like a pandemic. Like, what are some tips that you and advice would you give leaders during this time?
Well, actually, before I say anything else, I want to extend my sincere gratitude and absolute appreciation to all women during this National Women's Month recognition
Definitely.
for all that you do. It really should be a year-round acknowledgement. That's just me. So,
Thank you, Dr. Nash.
So before I begin, though, I always like to say, you're here by purpose, not by circumstance. And yes, and to answer your question, some of the tips during this difficult time, there are many tips I can give out, but you know, the pandemic has impacted all leaders, and what it has done, it caused them to rethink their way of leading. What worked then certainly may not have been working during the pandemic. And some of the things that I would say that has worked or have not worked during the pandemic, you know, one tip I would say is effective leadership during that time frame, or inaction or action or inaction, know when to make a decision, how to make a decision. But the one major thing that I have noticed that many leaders I have talked to and that continue to talk to is the communication. That alone will break or make your organization or your team. Because if during the pandemic, it has been determined that you must continue your communication. Actually, you must expand it. So you have to be in constant communication. You have to do things that you wouldn't normally do. You know, even myself within my organization, we started doing things a little differently with the communication way of doing things. You have to do it via email. But one thing that we did abrupt phone calls to keep people engaged, because it's all about keeping people engaged. If you don't keep them engaged, you will lose them. So make them feel engaged, make them feel important, and make them feel connected. Because if you don't, you will lose them. And if they don't feel valued, then you're going to lose them again.
Great advice. Great advice. Now, one of the things that we have to be mindful of is that change happens and difficult times are going to come about. So we have to, you know, you just can't say, oh, well, I don't need to worry about that. Everything is great right now. You know, the pandemic is, you know, we're of the upswing. Things are looking better, but we just can't go back to the way it used to be. So you still have to transition, and you still have to be prepared for the unexpected as well. So some of the things that I talked about on Tuesday is when I reflected on when we had the earthquake. And I was teaching in the classroom, and the earth started shaking and moving, and I'm like, oh my God, and I'm panicking on the inside. But my students were looking at me to remain calm and to give them answers as to what to do. And so as leaders, we have to be mindful is that during difficult times, during a challenge or an emergency, people are going to look at us for the answers. So all eyes will be on the leaders in that building or in that community or that organization. So as teacher leaders, people are still going to look up to you for that advice or for direction as to what we're going to do. Things happen, emergencies happen, and challenging times will come. But as leaders, we have to make sure that we are prepared to lead our team, our staff, our organization, right? So Dr. Nash, help me give out some of these tips. My first tip that I want to share, and you kind of already mentioned it, is about being flexible. During difficult times, you have to be flexible. Leaders, you have to be flexible. We can't be rigid. We can't say, oh, we're just going to keep on doing what we always do. No, you have to be flexible. You have to kind of pivot. You got to be, kind of change things up. So talk a little bit for us, Dr. Nash, about that, the importance of being flexible.
Yes. Well, I'm going to talk about that, but I also want to thank you because you started talking about teacher leadership, and that right there alone is just so significant. But to answer your question, I just want to just hit on just a couple more things about the pandemic, because in time of crisis, decision action is needed. And like you just talking about for teacher leadership. And it's okay. It's okay. People need to know it's okay if you don't have all the answers. Let them know, but you have to be honest about it. You cannot try to tell them something because they will pick up on it, especially children, kids, students these days, and are a lot smarter than people may think they are. And they will pick up on whatever if you're dishonest. And because they value honesty over anything else, they value that. If you tell them the truth, that's fine. But being flexible, you have to be flexible because, you have to help change. And you know what? This pandemic has taught us so much about change. Change management. You have to be a change agent, if you will, because you will have to teach your students or employees. Hey, the reason I say that, because you as a leader, they're looking to you to lead them, not manage them. They're looking to you to lead them in a time of crisis, in a time of need. That's what they're looking for. And if you're rigid and if you cannot, they will be reluctant to follow you. But being visible and accessible at crucial time, that's when people feel connected about it. So, and some of the things that that leaders and teachers need to be aware of during the pandemic, and they need to start looking at their students and their employees for possible depression or how they're acting, or are they fearful? Decreased productivity. Look at little things, but it's all about knowing your students and knowing your employees. That's where it starts.
Excellent. I love it. And being flexible enough to adjust based on the needs of your students, and based on the needs of your staff, based on the needs of your organization, because during the difficult times, you never know how you're going to have to pivot. So I love that. And then the next thing is that during difficult times, leaders have to be intentional and deliberate. So think about that, Dr. Nash. How do we be intentional about what we're doing, about what we say? And also, who do we partner with as leaders? Like you said, you don't have all the answers, but you have to be intentional about getting the right answers and consulting with different partners, consulting with the teachers, the parents, the students. So you really have to be intentional about the steps you do decide to make. So talk to us about that, Dr. Nash.
Well, the first thing you want to do, how do you do that? There was a question. You start by telling the truth, truthfulness. And then you employ some of your leadership skills to employ that. But see, in the corporation, but you can also employ that in the same thing in an educational system. You could go to your higher up or your other leadership to get support for that. That's how you can actually maintain or execute some of those teacher leadership skills that you're talking about. So, but another thing I found, some of those leadership skills that come in very handy during this flexible and the managing time. You have to have humility. You have to have
Mm,
compassion. You have to have consistency. And another thing, you have
love
to
it.
have effective listening ability. What do I mean by that? You have to listen for understanding because there's a big difference between listening and listening for understanding. Because if you don't, they're going to not your students or your employees. You're going to lose them in the field, and they're going to think you're not paying attention, and that's what's going to happen. But it's important that you employ your senior leadership to help you because you may not be able to do it all by yourself. And if you get their support, you will go a long way in achieving your success.
Awesome, awesome. And then the next tip, Dr. Nash, is during difficult times, leaders need to be transparent. Like you said, we don't know the answers or we don't know something. Just be honest, be transparent. Talk about what you don't know, but also give the steps as to how you're going to solve a problem or how you're going to go about getting the answers. And just again, getting your team together so that you guys can work together to solve the problems or to get the answers that you need. So again, be transparent. Don't just
Yes.
make up something because it sound good, because that's just going to mess it up even worse. Because you're going to lose people's trust. They're not going to have faith in you, and like you said, they're going to lose that faith, that trust, and you're going to lose your team. So you definitely want to be transparent. So Dr. Nash, help us with that.
Well, you keep saying that word is so meaningful, transparent, because it all goes back to, are they going to believe? Well, let's go back for just a minute. Let's talk about that leadership. What is leadership? It's the ability to influence someone. It's the
Yes,
ability to motivate someone. But if you can't influence them or you can't make them believe you or buy in, well, you, you're not doing all of that you're supposed to do. You have to have that ability to do that. But being transparent, if you're telling them the truth, if you're telling them what is what, okay, what do you know? If one of the biggest things I learned when when I was in the military, if I had enlisted an officer, if I was not transparent with someone, they could see right through it. Transparent. And I'm not no pun on transparency, but they can see right through it. And if you lose your followers, or if you lose your employees, what do you have? You're gonna lose. You're gonna reduce productivity. And if you're in a school environment, what are you gonna have? Your students are not gonna believe in you. They're gonna lose the faith in you if you don't have transparency because they will think to themselves. They may not tell you outright, but they would think to themselves, is she or he being truthful or transparent with me? Are they telling me what they want me to know or what I should know? Is the truth coming forth? Because if they hear it from somewhere else, then they're not going to trust you.
exactly. And just when we talk about school leadership as well, we have to think about our relationship with our parents as well, and also the other teachers that you work with. So
Mm-hmm.
that transparency is so important, and making sure that you're building a collaborative culture where people can work together, especially during difficult times. That's when you really need to lean
Yes.
on each other and work as a team in order to get through that difficult time. So that's really important. And then the last tip for difficult times is you'd have to be transformational. You have to be transformational. And that goes along with being collaborative as well, working as a team to come up with, innovative solutions to your problems and making sure that you have a vision for where you want your school to be, where you want your organization to be after this difficult time. So you have to be transformational,
Yes.
sort of like what you said, Dr. Nash, being a change agent and a manager of change. That's a part of being transformational as well. So you have to have that impact on your team. If you are a teacher leader, you want to have influence during this time. When we're talking about distance learning or hybrid instruction or whatever we're doing during this pandemic, we want to make sure that we're working collaboratively. So you have to build that collaborative culture where everyone can come together, trust one another, so that you guys can definitely do what you have to do to meet the needs of your students as well. So can you talk about being transformational? What is a transformational leader?
Well, it's funny you bring that up because, when we talk about different leadership styles, there are so many leadership styles out there. And one thing to remember when you're talking about leadership styles, there's no one size fit all. Okay. But it's the best leadership style that fits you. And as a teacher, you are a leader. So are you transformational? Are you transforming someone? Are you changing them? Are you a transactional? Or are you a laissez-faire? Meaning you're just going along
Doing whatever.
Yes. So
Going with the
being
flow.
transformational is one of the better ones because you know what you're doing. You're getting that individual or student, you're transforming them, you're getting them to buy in and say, hey, to the way of the organization, to the way of the school. What are they going to do? They're going to learn better. They're going to be more productive. Why? Because they believe in you, or they believe in the system, or they're transforming. They're making over, a changeover, if you will. And that right there alone, I tell you, given today's students, when I was in school 100 years ago, it was, it was a little bit different. But today's student, I just can't imagine being a teacher in today's classroom. It's so much difficult because you have to transform. You have to maintain their attention. But transforming now to change them, to get them to see things differently, the way they used to see them, there has to be just has to be a challenge. And I know it is. When I heard the stories and I have seen the products.
It's a challenge, Dr. Nash, but the good news is that, in so many schools, we have some great teacher leaders who are working collaboratively, and we are definitely figuring out innovative ways to engage scholars and prepare them for the future. So it is a challenge, but we're getting it done because that's what teachers do. So, Dr. Nash, one of the things, like I said, we're talking about leadership, and teacher leadership is so important. Everyone talks about the administration and school leadership at the top, but one of the things that you talk about is leadership from all sides. We're gonna get to your book in a minute, but talk about how leadership, even when you talk about the school leadership, teacher leadership is so essential as well. So can you talk a little bit in general about the importance of teacher leadership?
Absolutely. And I'm glad you brought that up. Teacher leadership. What is teacher leadership? We keep talking about it. Well, actually, it's, Webster might define it as skills demonstrated by teachers or who continue to teach students, in a school environment, but also influence them beyond the classroom. Well, one may say, you know what? Well, we do that all the time, but you do. As teachers, if you are doing your job, and I know you are, most they go in there, they teach in the classroom, but it extends beyond the classroom.
Say that part again, Dr. Nash. That's the powerful part. We don't want to skim over that. Say that part. It extends what now? Say it again.
Extends beyond the classroom. Yes. Teachers, let me tell you something. Teachers, that job, they're just never done. It's never done. I'll tell you what, let me give you a prime example. If you have a student in your class and you see him outside the classroom, that student is going to react differently when he sees you. That student is going to behave differently. And if you go up to him, that student is going to think you're still teaching, even though you're in a supermarket. And how do I know? I was the same way. Whenever I was around my teacher, I react the same way. Teacher leadership is beyond the classroom, beyond the building, because you know what you're doing is what the teacher does inside the building, but it's not necessarily that, but it's how the teacher leader works with larger communities to drive things home, because a lot of teachers are active in the community, in the churches. Teacher leadership is so important because what it does, it provides a better student for the school. So
thank you, Dr. Nash, for saying that. Because again, when we're thinking about building a school community and the school culture, you have to rely on great teachers. And teacher leadership, I would say this all the time, teacher leadership is a mindset, not a position. So great teaching is so important. In order for you to really practice and build on your practice as a teacher, you have to go beyond the classroom. You have to think about how you're going to work collaboratively with your team. How are you guys going to, basically do action research to figure out the needs of the students and how we're going to improve our practice, how we're going to modify the curriculum and do all the things that teachers do. You have to be a leader in order to get that work done. And so it's so important that when we talk about schools and, really improving our schools, that we're also thinking about teacher leadership and how important it is to our school community. And the one more thing, Dr. Nash, I can't let you go without telling us about your leadership journey. Because I've read your bio, I've had conversation with you, and from your leadership journey is definitely one that can be inspiring to others as well. So tell us a little bit about your leadership journey.
Okay, well, I guess I will have to start by saying my leadership journey, it began when I finished high school. But, let me just back up just a minute, because it was still going on even when I was in high school, and that was provided by my mother, okay? And also by my oldest brother, who I deem as my hero. He's my late brother, but anyway, he was in the Army. He provided a lot of leadership for us. But when I went in the military, because I was enlisted first, and then I was commissioned officer. But I started off in what we call a leading petty officer. What is a leading petty officer? That's an E1 to E6 and enlisted. And at the time, I was a leading petty officer in charge of my division, okay? And I'm the direct representative because I report or am responsible to the E7, E8, and E9 for my entire division. After I was commissioned, then the other jobs came along because I was a naval officer, because I was in the Navy for 25 years. And then I did other things for another 15. So I've had about 40 years as a leadership experience. So once I left the Navy after 25, let's talk about the Navy. I was a department head. I was operations officer, had about 120 people, about 150. I was combat system officer. I had 120 people. I was a tactical action officer. That's where I am in charge of shooting the weapons from the ship. All of these, remind you, have great responsibility. And in addition to those, I was an air warfare officer. One of the things that I did, I don't know if you all may remember, but one of the things, I was an Aegis ballistic missile program officer, where I shot missiles. And it's about 15 years ago. It's like hitting a bullet with a bullet. And you have to get to people with the really heavy brain, the 15-pound brains over at Johns Hopkins and everywhere else, to figure out how this works, because it's like hitting a bullet with a bullet 200 miles above the earth.
Wow.
Exo-atmosphere. So shooting those missiles, you have to have great patience, but you also have to have great leadership. And division officers. I was a division officer, and all of these things I'm telling you carries heavy weight. So once I did retire from the military,
and thank you for your service, by the way.
Well, you're absolutely welcome.
Thank you so much.
Once I did retire from the military, and by the way, I told you I'm from Mississippi. I don't know if I did say that, but I am. And for 25 years, the United States Navy tried very hard to get rid of my Mississippi accent. They did to an extent, but it came back once I left the Navy. So once I did leave the Navy, I was private industry. I was a contractor for about 3 years, and then I became a government federal employee, and I've been the federal employee for the past 12 years. So you add it all up, that's 40 years.
Wow!
Yeah. And so
that's how you become a leadership expert. So tell us a little bit about your book, Dr. Nash. We want to hear about your book, and when can we find your book?
Okay, my book, The Leading Edges, leading from the front, the back, the sides, and the top to bottom. Why? Because all leaders can't lead from the front. All leadership is not from the front. Sometimes you have to go back. As a good leader, an effective leader, you have to provide that push, or you have to be beside them to let them know that, hey, I'm beside you all the way. You have my support. But
exactly.
Yes, and you can find my book on the book patch, and with the name I just told you, Leading Edges, or you can go to Amazon. Either one will get you some great book with all kind of great information. and it goes from A to Z about leadership, anything you want to know. Team building, motivation, communication, you name it, it's in there.
Everything about leadership, guys. So you heard his journey from Navy all the way up to federal government, and now he's an author. So like I said before, guys, he's a leadership expert, and we definitely want to follow you and glean from your expertise. Thank you, Dr. Nash, and you have joined the village, so we'll see you again, right, Dr. Nash?
I hope so.
All right. Well, thank you again, Dr. Nash, for joining us and giving us your tips for leadership. See you next time, Dr. Nash.
Thank you. And thank you again for having me.
All right. So, Village, I hope you took some great notes on how we can lead during difficult times. Now, you heard from an educator on Tuesday, and now today you heard from a leadership expert and professional developer and instructor for leadership. So again, guys, we have to be flexible, intentional, transparent, and transformational if we're going to lead during these difficult times. I know things are getting better and we're going back into schools, but we just can't go back to the same old, same old. We have to be fit, flexible, intentional, transparent, and transformational. Again, follow The Village on Facebook and Instagram at The Village LG. We are a group of teachers coming together to learn more about leadership. Because why? Because leadership is a mindset, not a position. Till next time, guys, have a great one.